All right, we're here back at Orlando Code Camp 2013. I'm Brian Hall. With me I have Shawn Wildermuth with Wilder Minds, and he's also got some courses on Pluralsight. But he's teaching a couple sessions today. We've got JavaScript for C# developers and cross-platform apps with PhoneGap.
Yep.
So, JavaScript for C# developers. What's that?
Well, that's a very abbreviated version of my Pluralsight course.
All right.
Covers sort of the big picture items there. Lots of C# people are being forced to head back into JavaScript, as they probably, most ASP.NET people probably should have learned it a long time ago.
Right.
Me included, back in the day when I was doing, classic ASP and all that, I detested it, and I really walked away from the web on purpose because it was just a painful place to be.
Right.
And I was happily surprised a couple of years ago when I came back and there was, an ecosystem that actually allowed you to get stuff done again. And the language hadn't really developed as much as it could have, but the community around it had solved the problems by saying, well, if you want something that looks and feels like something you're comfortable with, these are the sort of ways to go about it. That's how you handle large-scale development, and stop putting it in click handlers in the HTML.
Right.
All
Exactly.
that stuff. We finally had some ways to really well separate, the UI code from the logic code and all that. So I've been pretty excited since then. In that, I wouldn't prefer to write JavaScript in C#, but there's just a bunch of environments where it makes more sense. And when I came back into it, I really didn't remember much of what I had done because I don't think I really understood JavaScript back then. I was sort of just getting it to work.
Yeah.
And, like a lot of us. And I found a bunch of stuff that when I tried to map what I was doing in C#, because curly braces to JavaScript, were just wrong. They were just completely, diametrically opposed. One of the problems for C# people is that it looks sort of like C#.
Yeah.
And it's so totally not.
Yeah.
Oddly, the VB people have an easier time picking it up because not only does it look different, but there's actually some things that are closer to VB and JavaScript than C#.
Right.
Things like being able to use variants and things, especially people who have their history back in VB 1 through 6,
Right.
before VB.NET. And so I packaged it up in a little course, and today we're going to talk about kind of the highlights, the big pain points that most people are going to run into.
And I mean, for me personally, as a C# developer, kind of jumping into the JavaScript space, the things that when it clicked is when I saw some of the patterns that you can use to create class-like syntax or scenarios.
Yeah.
You can structure my JavaScript code in a way that's understandable to me as an object-oriented programmer. So.
And that's true. One of the things that I try to hammer in the course into people's head is to just because everything's a class in C# doesn't mean that all your JavaScript should be classes.
Right.
And that it's very seductive at first to go, okay, I know how to do this. I'll just create a class for this, and a class for this, and a class for this. Whereas a lot of times just using, people go, well, how do I make a static class? Well, you don't. You just make an object,
Right.
And trying to get back to those patterns of I have these sort of worker pieces that don't belong in classes because I don't need to new them.
Right.
The new is sort of the magic keyword there. If I don't need to create a bunch of these, then I don't need a class. I just need one, and that's part of the challenge, is to not use the screwdriver from Silverlight. From C# on everything you do.
Right.
In JavaScript.
That's exactly right. And I think in your course you speak about talking to the duck typing, where in a lot of cases you might create that function or class and call it from within another function.
Yep.
But instead you just do it in line because it's dynamic. It's duck typing, and you don't need to do all that if you're only going to use it that one time.
And there's benefits to duck typing, certainly in building, getting up to speed and getting code working. Duck typing can really help you. There's a lot of ceremony in C#.
Right.
The opposite problem of that is once you get a code base of a certain size, that duck typing can cause a lot of pain because you don't have a compiler to do the checks, right? And so you end up having to write a lot of JavaScript code to check, input variables and
Right.
things like that, or input parameters, to make sure that they're the correct types and the correct order. And so that's where something like Script Sharp can really come in and go, okay, we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. We're allowing ourselves to be proficient in JavaScript, and then having this step before that to say, oh, these parameters have to match, and having something to clue us in, not at runtime.
Script Sharp or TypeScript?
TypeScript, sorry, not.
Script Sharp.
Did I say Script Sharp?
Yeah, C Sharp. You write C Sharp and it spits out JavaScript.
Yeah. I'm not actually a fan of that. One of the reasons I like TypeScript so much is it's a superset.
Right.
So everything that is JavaScript is valid TypeScript.
Right.
And then as you need to sort of use the syntactical declaration to make it easier, you can decide to only do that in 10% of your code or 90% of your code or whatever makes sense for your organization.
Right.
And it's not like CoffeeScript where you're saying you can do this, but we're going to invent it and we're going to use an entirely different syntax to do it. So you'll end up having to debug the JavaScript, which if you do a lot of CoffeeScript, you're not that familiar with.
Exactly. Yeah. If you do TypeScript, you more or less know JavaScript.
Yeah.
It just gives you more structure around your JavaScript.
Yeah, it gives you that early pass to go, oh, okay, there's a problem between these guys that I wouldn't have identified until a customer went, why does submit no? Right. I mean, and as a code base grows and it grows old as well as grow in size, that becomes a bigger problem. So, TypeScript is, I think, really advantageous in the enterprise space where you're going to have these very large code bases.
Yeah, I mean, because the nice thing about C Sharp is you come into an API that you're not familiar with in C Sharp, and you hit dot.
Yeah.
And now you've got at least a starting point to explore the API of what you're dealing with. With JavaScript, it depends on the documentation.
It does.
There's a lot of variables that can drive you into the unknowns. You have to be careful. So.
Though in the course I talk, I don't know that I'll have time to today, but in the course I talk about the JavaScript style of passing parameters. That it's much more common to pass in an object, so you're only overriding these different pieces. So you're not having, people are like, well, I can't do overloading in JavaScript. That means I'm going to have to create 14 versions of this. No, you're going to create one version that takes an object, and then you're going to deal with it there. And getting people to learn these different patterns of invocation that are very different from .NET. And in some ways, you would like .NET to be able to do more of that. I mean, anonymous types and late binding and C# can allow you to do some of that, but it just doesn't feel right in the ecosystem. So it's probably not going to take up there. But I don't want people writing their JavaScript the way they write their C# because they are such a different environment.
It's two languages. If you embrace it, accept it. You will. If you understanding that it's not just a scripting thing. It's an actual language. It's got its own features. And
that it's going to perform in the neighborhood of C#.
Right.
Now, back in the day, the big complaint was its speed, which was definitely true. It was an order of magnitude slower, sometimes 2 orders of magnitude slower than managed code, because there was no jitting, there was no, all these technologies have come in. You can almost guarantee that unless you're working in IE5.5 or 6, that you're going to be using a JavaScript engine that's going to get you in the ballpark of managed code. Managed code is still probably always going to beat it for a number of reasons, but most of the code we have, we're not writing back-end code that's going to, fire up 14 threads and then do all this heavy level processing. We're waiting for someone to press a button in a lot of the code that JavaScript's going to do all that. So the speed, having it fast enough that it compiles quickly when you download it into the browser, and then have the browser actually have the code executed at a reasonable speed. Now you don't have to worry about it. It's always going to be fast.
That problem's been solved now. So
in many ways, depending on the platform.
The other class that you're doing is cross-platform applications using PhoneGap.
Yeah.
So PhoneGap, for people that may not know, if they don't, I'm living under a rock, I guess.
Sure.
But you've got HTML5, JavaScript, package it up, and CSS, and you package that up. PhoneGap build you can use to build your packages and deploy to iOS.
Or Icenium, which is a product by Telerik is something similar.
Ah, yes.
Or you can build them yourself. I mean, PhoneGap build isn't required. I talk about it. That's the method I usually use. But the idea there is that a way to package on the different platforms a single code base that, for the most part, is going to be the same across those applications. And in the course, I spend a good amount of time talking about the why, not necessarily the how. I'm going to show them a little how and show them on some devices, the same app running on 3 different devices, so they can kind of see it. Then I'll build if we have time. 15 minutes is not a lot of time. Or we'll build the Windows 8 version, because that's something PhoneGap Build doesn't do yet, is the Windows 8 version.
They do Windows Phone, though, right?
They do.
Yeah.
Windows Phone 7. So that's, you probably should build your own Windows 7 as well. I use it for iOS and Android and Kindle build, and then I have my own builds, because I'm comfortable in Visual Studio as well. That's part of the... Well, I've used PhoneGap still, even though I'm using the Visual Studio to build them. It's the same code base. I'm just actually doing the build instead of having something like PhoneGap Build do it for me.
Right.
But the important point is kind of where it fits into the ecosystem. You know, you've got something like PhoneGap, you've got the Mono tools, Mono Touch and Mono Android, and you have native, and why shouldn't everybody be writing everything in native, and the whole, actually bring up the whole Facebook controversy, and Facebook decided to go all native, and does that mean everybody needs to? So the hope is to have that conversation, because that's more important to me than telling them where to download it. If they understand the why, they can figure out that.
And so to that end, then you've got PhoneGap, something I keep hearing on like the .NET Rocks podcast. I hear Carl mention something about, well, what about when I press that button and I don't get a response? But in my opinion, that's not necessarily a product of PhoneGap, because if you're hitting that button and it's not responding, all of your code is there on the phone. It's not like it's hitting a server to get the HTML.
Correct.
So if there's a non-responsive button, there should be something there that's in your code that's making it non-responsive, and it's not because it's PhoneGap. It should
Correct.
Right.
I mean, you can write bad PhoneGap just like you can write bad web applications. PhoneGap doesn't protect you from that. And you can write bad Objective-C. I know because I've done it. And I'm sure you can, the same with the Mono tools. It's a matter of understanding you're building an app. You're not going to take your website code and shove it in a PhoneGap container and have an app. It's not going to work, and it won't pass the Apple Store anyway. If it looks anything like your website, they're going to reject it. But it really is, let's say, taking a lot of the business logic you might have for an existing property like your website and reusing it with a UI that's built for the phone. And if you already have web guys, they can get into that a lot quicker than having to learn Objective-C, Android, XAML, and maybe even WinJS, there's this piece of, in order to just get this app out there. I'm using it in a little startup that I have because we wanted to get to market to see if there was a market, right? We expect that at some point we may need to do native apps for all of them. But we're going to use that as a refactoring experience, right? If we get to the point where we reach the performance ceiling for PhoneGap, we'll go write a native app, and probably with Mono Droid or Mono Touch, because I'm comfortable in that world. I probably wouldn't go all the way to Java or Objective-C. I could, or I could go hire someone to do it. But we see that as an opportunity, especially in the kind of application we're doing. It's mostly waiting for web requests anyway. I can put up a spinning wait cursor in any language, It's not like the performance of it. Other people that need something more real-time or lots of animations or writing games, PhoneGap might not be the right solution because of this performance ceiling you're going to hit at some point. And your app may never. There's lots of applications in all the marketplaces that are written with PhoneGap that just don't need to be that fast. You know, turn-by-turn poker game is never going to have to be fast.
Exactly. You're not doing real-time, like you said, animations and graphics and all that stuff.
But if you're going to do a canvas-based race car game, it's never going to perform well enough. It's not. It's the wrong tool. So kind of understanding that space, and probably won't perform the same on the different platforms, because you still have different browsers, Safari versus Chrome versus old Android browser, whatever that monstrosity was, and then of course IE on the Windows platforms.
And the other argument that I hear about with PhoneGap is that, well, then you're writing once and running everywhere. Well, theoretically, yes, you can do that, but I'd imagine that you are skinning it, using different styles in your CSS maybe to
At one point, that was more important, that it looked like the OS.
Okay.
I used to really espouse that. Of course, you're going to write a free platform because it needs to look. The only people that have ever complained were the Windows Phone people. They're particularly passionate about, why are you using a pivot there? It looks like an Android app. And problematically, getting the Windows Phone look is about the most difficult of all of them.
Right.
Because of Windows 8 is similar to that, but you can sort of mimic Windows 8 a little easier. But on Windows Phone, the idea of something like a panorama or a pivot is a pretty complicated set of HTML, and taking what you have and just skinning it with CSS is virtually impossible.
Right.
Telerik has a package called Kendo UI Mobile that they have shipped Android and iOS skins for, and they now have a beta of a Windows Phone skin for it. They also had a BlackBerry skin, but I'm not even building for BlackBerry, even though Bill does it for me. I just don't want to have to test it. And I don't think anyone cares on BlackBerry about apps.
Yeah, not anymore at least.
Or maybe they will again soon, but right now
it could change. That's the mantra of the last 4 or 5 years, that's for sure. So, but okay, well, definitely. Thank you for coming out and speaking with us. And speaking of Code Camp, you're coming down from Atlanta or Georgia area. So definitely appreciate that.
No worries.
And,
no worries.
and
good.
Where can people find you? How can they?
You can go to wildermuth.com, which is the blog. Wilderminds.com is the company site.
Right.
And everyone, if they want to play with an app that's built in PhoneGap, How to Watch is the name of the app, or How to Watch, it's HOWTOWAT.ch.
Okay.
And that'll show you how to install the apps, or you can just use the web app.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll put those links in the show notes so you guys can definitely get that. And definitely appreciate you coming on here.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Thank you.